A very good morning. This is Dollars and Cents on 938 Live, hoping to save you a couple of bucks this morning. When we talk about saving money for SMEs and the dangers of not seeking proper legal advice because of the lack of knowledge or high legal fees, is it a case of being a little bit penny wise and pound foolish? Well, help may be at hand with VanillaLaw. It's an online legal document assembly software that allows any business to develop their own legal documents at a fraction of the time and the cost of consulting with a traditional lawyer. We're going to find out more from lawyer and perhaps the man behind this disruptive technology that's giving traditional law firms perhaps a run for their money. We're joined this morning by the founder of MG Chambers, Mark Go. Mark, a very good morning, sir.
Good morning, Keith.
How did you come up with this particular, if I could use the word, template?
Okay. I've been civil litigator for 23 years now, and most of my clients have indicated to me that they find the costs of housekeeping and preventing themselves from coming to court very prohibitive.
Right.
So about 2 years ago, I decided and said that, one of the baseline issues for housekeeping is to housekeep your contracts.
Okay.
And there are proliferation of templates that you can buy off. But these templates are pretty dangerous, if I may say so.
Sure.
Without the guidance of a lawyer. There is no system out there where you can have a hybrid of using a system to guide the user to come up with what we call a first draft, and then have the lawyer review the first draft. With the VanillaLaw system, it does just that. Basically, the system guides the user to come out with what we call a good first draft. It is not, we won't advise them not to have it reviewed, and then later on the lawyer basically takes over and just does the review, and thereby you actually have a significant cost savings in that sense.
We'll talk about whether or not it's ironclad if I'm downloading something off the internet in just a moment, but let's talk about SMEs. We know that they are resource constrained these days. They have to get certain things done with limited budget. Let's put it out there. The resources can be limited, but and SMEs run the spectrum from perhaps $1,000 company right up to $1 billion company, and they're termed SMEs. But these days, everyone is being urged, perhaps take your business overseas. When with the lack of intellectual property protection, we're not talking Singapore, we seem to be very, very well protected for your intellectual property here, but when you take it abroad, how protected are they?
Well, the protection solution it's not so easy, as in you just look for a contract and then you say that this solution would suffice. We usually look at solution as a combination. Let me give you an example. We have heard in 2020 that there is going to be a fast speed rail between Singapore and KL.
Right.
Now, using that as an example, suppose that you are an SME, and suppose you are a subcontractor and you've landed yourself with this big contract.
Right.
And it's the first time, because I don't think in this region we have a fast speed rail, and it's something new from your normal business. What you can do, a simple protection, and it's not very expensive, is to set up another company called a special purpose vehicle.
Right.
And this company can exist for this particular project.
For the duration of the project.
For the duration of project. Right. So if anything happens, what you are doing is that you are compartmentalizing your risk, and you are not actually putting your own business at risk, but rather you're having a special project vehicle that deals with this business. And if the project is successful, you can then expand this special projects vehicle to something bigger, and then you can go regional.
So basically you're protecting your core assets. Should that be at the front and center of any SME?
SME should think in more than one dimension. That means usually when they are thinking of pennies and dollars and cents, they're only thinking of sales. That's what my experience tells me. But what we are encouraging them to do is that, there are more to just selling and trading. If you look at a business, there are many aspects to a business. Take for instance in human resource. If they are able to look in that another dimension, they will say that, well, I can have a mixture of fixed long-term employment, which is a traditional employment contract. You can also look at freelance agreements, and that will, help mitigate some of the costs.
669-11938. We have a call coming in. Unfortunately, that caller seems to have left the building at the moment. But if you do have a question for Mark, our number 669-11938. Mark, at the start of the interview, you said contract keeping. Do SMEs not keep their contracts in, for the layman in layman's terms, in view perhaps, and fulfilling their contracts?
That's a very, very, very good question. In fact, my experience shows me that the top reason they go to end up in court is because they don't have contracts at all.
Wow.
Yeah.
How can you do business without a...
Well, in our Asian context, Guanxi is...
you mean work on a handshake?
That's right.
Okay.
It's high up there. It's a cultural thing. And, when Singapore was... developing and our rule of law was not that robust, you would find that businesses are done basically on trust and on friendship, and therefore, from a cultural perspective, we have gotten used to doing business on this kind of level, and therefore a lot of companies actually end up in court because they have no written document.
Wow.
And then we are having to have the courts decipher what was the intent of the party, and you end up in a 5-day trial, and that is just the cost is astronomical. When a simple agreement or simple contract would have allowed them to avoid such a catastrophe.
Is this more often the rule rather than the exception in this day and age?
The thing is this, my observation is that when we are talking about SME bosses in the 50s, I would say that the Guanxi factor is rather large. But I will agree with you that with the newer entrepreneurs that are coming up, the younger ones, 30-something, those that have gone to university and school or even polytechnic, tertiary education, they are coming to realize the importance of a document. But you have a new problem now.
Okay.
The new problem is they download it from the internet.
Really? Okay.
Yes. Let me give you an example.
Okay.
About 3 years ago, I have a case. We'll just call them Peter and Paul.
Okay.
They are, trained in the US. They saw that in the US market there was a demand for what we call these industrial ovens to bake silicon chips. And they have the specifications and the design to do that. They came back to Asia to look for a manufacturer, and they found one in Taiwan. But the manufacturer could only manufacture what we call a generic industrial oven. So they needed to hand him some plans in order to modify these ovens for a specific purpose. So they downloaded an agreement because they want, and the agreement was, the body and the content of the agreement was an exclusive distribution agreement, which is a wrong agreement.
Okay.
What should have happened if had they seen a lawyer is that a lawyer would have basically have a combination of agreements. You would start off with maybe a main agreement, which is a manufacturing agreement, and that would be exclusive to them because it's a specific product. You will also have a collateral agreement, which is something like a non-disclosure agreement or a trade secrets protection, non-circumvention. That means you do not compete with me. And that would be something a typical lawyer would have advised them to do, but they didn't do that.
Supposing Peter and Paul sought advice in Singapore and then went across to the US, how enforceable would the contracts have been if it was originated and conceived in Singapore, but yet I am making tweaks to my manufacturer's specifications for this industrial oven, this generic industrial oven?
Singapore is unique, very unique in this part of the world. Our government actually has signed a lot of treaties.
Right.
And the Singapore SIAC, which is in Singapore Institute of Arbitration Center,
right,
is very highly regarded. So if a contract were to be entered using Singapore law, and then if a dispute happened, you can agree to have the dispute settled in the Singapore International Arbitration Center.
Okay.
These awards that come out from the Singapore International Arbitration Center is enforceable in most cities under the New York Convention. You will find that a lot of major trading areas and major city centers, in fact, a lot of countries have already signed on and said they will enforce those awards that come out of Singapore.
So this arbitration, the SIAC, is binding on signatories?
Yes. It's binding on signatories.
We are speaking this morning with Mark Goh. Mark's the founder of MG Chambers. He's also the man behind the online document assembly software VanillaLaw, which allows any business to develop their own legal documents at a fraction of the time and the cost of consulting a traditional lawyer. We're talking about SMEs and perhaps their neglect of consulting a lawyer or getting legal advice when getting into their business. We're going to find out about patents. How enforceable are they if they are patented in Singapore? Intellectual property protected in Singapore, how safe are they overseas? We will come back, talk with Mark in 2 minutes. Back into Dollars and Cents on 938 Live, talking about SMEs and the grasp of the law, especially when doing businesses. And of course, the eye-opening feature that our guest Mark Goh, founder of MG Chambers, says many people do not have contracts which end them in legal hot water, or at least out of pocket when dealing with matters when they get into court. But I'm going on and on. Mark, a very good morning. Thank you for making it in. Earlier we talked about contracts and the lack of which. Now let's talk about patents and intellectual property. We talked about people sharing certain secrets with manufacturers overseas and not having a particular non-disclosure agreement, which also gets them into a bit of trouble. And so let's talk about patents. If an item, say software these days, everyone's big on software development. Say your software VanillaLaw, how safe is it if someone else downloads it and not pays you a cent somewhere else in the world?
Right. That's a very, very, very good question. Now, the area of patent is very specific. Actually, they come under umbrella of what we call intellectual property rights. And there are actually other rights other than patents. There's copyright, there's trademark, and of course patents. The first, with patents, there is a first what we call start point or threshold. And the first start point is what we call a patentable interest. You must have a patentable interest first before you can go on to the next stages of the examination. Unfortunately, computer programs, algorithms are a bit of a controversy in the world right now.
Really?
Some in the US and cases in the US and cases in the in UK are not decided on whether computer programs can be patentable.
Well, since we're on a business bent this morning, if we are talking, say I develop a trading algorithm which I am selling to perhaps aficionados of the trading industry, people use this, do you mean that particular algorithm can be duplicated somewhere else in the world and I would have no recourse to that?
Yes, it's possible. So in assuming, just using your example, so if you were to then apply for the patent to be examined in Singapore, say, and part of the process would be you have to actually explain how these things work, and you have to publish it in a public
Forum.
platform.
Okay.
And if someone in the US picks up and sees that this is how it works on the back end,
Right.
what happens is that he can basically copy it because it's not an infringement in the US, and then he can basically use it and say it's his idea. Because after all, in the US, if it's not patentable, it cannot be patented, then there's no protection.
That is a scary thought, especially in this day and age when everyone is so concerned about intellectual property protection. Trademarks. There are some trademark issues that have been going on, for lack of a better word, forever. Say if I had a T-shirt with some form of reptile on it, and someone else has a similar reptile just by a different name, and one's bigger and one's smaller, and this can go on for years. How enforceable is trademark infringement?
It is pretty enforceable here
In Singapore,
in Singapore.
Right.
The issue that the centrality of the issue that in your example will be whether it will be likely to cause confusion, because the key feature of trademark is that the trademark must be able to identify who the owner of the product or service is. That means it must be able to trace back to the originator of the this trademark owner. And if you have another person who then has a similar or roughly similar, you have to then look on a qualitative basis to see how similar it is and whether it will create confusion in the market as to who the originator is.
Right.
And that's the key. So there has been few cases that has been gone into the High Court in Singapore to decide this issue of confusion of the originator, and it's back and forth.
Indeed, because I was reading recently, some particular cases have been going on for as long as I've been alive, and it's been a pretty long time.
That's right.
And still no resolution. So, Mark, in the moments that we have left, what should SMEs take into consideration when embarking on a business venture?
Well, when they are on a business venture, I would assume that it's on a growth path.
Indeed.
Right, and the thing that we observe is that most SMEs do not have a clear strategy. Very important, they have to have a clear strategy on how they grow. It's not just buying and selling.
Sure.
But they have to think about their human resource. They have to think about their stocks. They have to think about their logistics and the supply chain. And then after that, they'll have to think about compliance. Because you cannot assume that the laws in Singapore, in terms of basic compliance, will be the same, say, in Thailand.
Sure, enforceable.
That's right. So you have to make sure that, the basic baseline compliance issues offshore is complied with.
So would a legal professional like yourselves have to be familiar with laws in Thailand, perhaps, as what you just brought up?
Well, the thing is that I can't practice in Thailand, but we have associates who we will have to work with. There will be differences, but some of the legal concepts you will find that they are roughly the same. And then if you're talking between foreign lawyers and a local lawyer, you can bridge that gap quite easily because both have got legal knowledge.
So if someone downloads VanillaLaw, would this be, well, just what you said with your associates all over the world, would this be enforceable? And
yes, so it depends on how you want to craft it, because for instance in VanillaLaw we have a unique clause selector, and if you come down to the clauses, what we call the governing clause, there are actually 5 options in there. You can have a domestic option, you can have an international option, you can have a mediation option. So it all depends on how you want to pick the option. So VanillaLaw allows you to build your ice cream, so to say.
Indeed.
With different toppings.
Without the fudge. Or with the fudge, if they like.
Yes.
So, Mark, how would people get their hands on this document? Do they just go search VanillaLaw on Google and get into it?
Yes. So we have a website.
Sure.
They can contact us, and then we will advise them on how to subscribe. It's a subscription base, program, and then we will guide them on how to set it up.
Mark, it's been enlightening speaking with you this morning, especially cutting through all the legalese this morning on Dollars and Cents. So if you need some help and perhaps you want to save some money and perhaps get some decent legal advice, you might want to check out VanillaLaw. Let your fingers do the walking, find it, subscribe to it, and get in touch with Mark. Mark is the founder of MG Chambers, and he's also the developer of VanillaLaw, which is an online legal document assembly software allowing businesses to develop their own legal documents at a fraction of the time and the cost of consulting with a traditional lawyer. Mark, say you'll come back, talk to us again on some other issue further on in the year. Mark Goh, again, founder of MG Chambers. Mark, thank you so much for making it in this morning.
Thank you, Keith.